Hello, my name is Alex Isles, and in today's episode, we're going to be looking at the Roman deity of love and sexual attraction, Venus. So, welcome back. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at Venus, who is the Roman deity of fertility, sexual attraction, victory, luck, so many different things. And I'm actually quite excited about this episode because it's quite a fun one to look at. When you think of Venus, you wouldn't necessarily think that she was also venerated by soldiers as well, but we'll come to that slightly later on in the second part of the episode. So starting off right now, we're going to talk about how Venus came to be within the pantheon of the Romans. Now, she probably started off as an Italic deity, and that would be of the tribes who were in central Italy around about the sort of 8th, 9th century BC, and those would have early gods who many people would sort of describe as Indo-European deities. So she probably started off as a fertility deity. When she started off as this fertility deity, over time, as the Roman people started trading with other cultures such as the Etruscans, the Sabines, and the Greeks, they would have picked up some elements of their deities. So she started to become a lot more similar to the Greek Aphrodite, but she still retained a lot of her Italic elements. And we'll talk about those a little bit more as we go on. Now, one of the early creation myths about Venus is really quite interesting because she is said to be created from the foam of the sea, but it's more than that as well, because apparently what happened was that Uranus's genitals were cut off and were thrown in the sea, and then the mixing of his genitals with the sea foam resulted in Aphrodite coming out of the waves fully grown. So again, we get to see elements of fertility, we get images of sexuality, sexual images as well, obviously, with a male god's genitals being added to the sea and resulting in Venus coming out fully grown. When you also have Venus as well, the interesting thing is that she is always associated with water. She's a water deity having come out of the sea. Now, when she's a water deity, this is also quite interesting because her counterparts in Greek myth, she's married to Hephaestus, who is the crippled blacksmith deity or the forge deity. And so he is physically deformed, and when he's physically deformed, he is seen as almost a counter to Aphrodite's almost perfect physical form, who is considered beautiful, highly sexualized, all of those sort of things, whereas Hephaestus is ugly, crippled, broken, but is incredibly creative as well, because obviously being a blacksmith deity, he creates things for the gods and forges their weapons. On the other hand, Venus is also seen as creative and is interesting in her own way as well. So just to sort of point out as well, her Greek name is Aphrodite, her Roman name is Venus, so we'll go with that too. Now with that, her other partner is Mars. Now in the Greek myths, that is actually really scandalous that they're having an affair, and Hephaestus at one point catches them having an affair together. In the Roman myths, it's really interesting. It's almost like glossed over, and it seems that she is less likely in the Roman myths. It's sort of mentioned, but it's not really focused on that apparently she's married to Vulcan, which is the Roman form of Hephaestus. But it seems instead that in a lot of Roman tombs and lot of Roman murals, her and Mars are always shown together. And I mentioned in the Mars episode the fact that they have a daughter Concordia, or the deity of peace in marriage, in state, and also associated strongly with Pax, the idea of peace as well. So Mars and Venus are seen as more of a couple and almost like a married couple within the Roman mythology, rather than Aphrodite and Hephaestus, which is in the Greek mythology. So an interesting one to look at there. When we're also looking at her as well, she is also seen as the ancestor of the Roman peoples. And when she's the ancestor of the Roman peoples, that's because she's the mother of Aeneas, who is one of the only survivors of Troy. When he's one of the only survivors of Troy, he retreats to Italy and then apparently becomes the ancestor of some of the Italic peoples who would later on go on with and go on to found Rome, which is really interesting as well because obviously, as I mentioned in the Mars episode, Mars is seen as the father of Romulus and Remus. So when you have the pairing and possibly even the marriage of Mars and Venus together, you're creating the Romans. So she is almost a mother to them. And she's also associated strongly with Julius Caesar because the Julii clan had a mythology that they were descended from Venus. So when you have that, you've got Julius Caesar, and he drew strongly on this because, as I mentioned before, Venus is associated with luck, she's associated with victory, and so when Caesar fought a lot of his campaigns, if his patron was Venus, then it explains a lot of what was going on there. You know, he can then claim that he has this authority, this success from Venus, who is his ancestor, and then that's why he's been able to do what he's been able to do. After Caesar's murder, his successor, Augustus, then continues this mythology as well and also venerates Venus too. So she becomes associated with that early dynasty too and is seen as a victory goddess through both Caesar and Augustus, but also the luck element where she brings them victory in over both the civil wars and also in their conquests and battles against other peoples as well. For the Romans too, Venus is also involved with the marriage ceremony. Now, Juno is the goddess of marriage and also, you know, the purity of marriage, all of those things coming together, and also of motherhood and childbearing. But at the start of the marriage celebrations, it seems that young women would take a sacrifice and give it to Venus. Now, this sacrifice might have actually been, in some documents, it suggested their childhood toys. So take these childhood toys and they would sacrifice them. But in other documents as well, it says it was to the lares or the household spirits. So it could be a mixture of things. Again, when we're looking at these documents, they're so ancient and there's a number of different references at different points that it's hard to tell. It could be just fashions at different times. One point, the fashion may have been for a sacrifice to Venus or to give over your childhood toys if you're a young woman getting married to the goddess Venus. In other times, it might be to the household gods and you made a sacrifice to them. Again, there's so much time and distance between it, it's a little bit hard to tell, but that makes it quite fun in a way to understand and see that it's not always black and white. Sometimes these traditions change different points, and that's what makes it really interesting. April was seen as Venus's month, and that's because in Latin the word sounds very similar, or is very similar to the word for opening. So again, we've got the element of fertility, flowers are opening, and that element of new life coming into the world too. So on the 1st of April, there was a festival to her. There was a festival to her, and this was in her form of sexual purity. It was founded after there had been a number of leading Roman men and Roman women, as well as some Vestal virgins, involved in a sex scandal. And so because of that, the Roman people were called upon to stop being sexually promiscuous, to be loyal to their partners, loyal to their husbands and wives, and to move away from sexual promiscuity. And as a part of this festival, the naked idol of Venus was taken and washed in the male baths. And again, the idea that Venus was bringing purity into marriage was a big part of that. On the 23rd of April, there was another festival as well associated with Venus. And this is quite an interesting one too, because with this festival, it was a wine festival. And so you had normal wine and you had religious sacrificial wine. Now, with the religious sacrificial wine, offerings were made to Venus because it was seen that she would be able to take mortals or humans' petitions to Jupiter. Now, Jupiter was seen as being quite susceptible to wine. And so Venus would take this wine to Jupiter and then would be able to say to him, well, you know, these mortals have requests. Would you listen to their requests? Would you listen to this? Would you make their lives better, or would you do those sort of things? And so the festival was divided up between aristocratic women, the normal women, and also slaves and prostitutes. And so because of that, different groups of society would have different petitions, gather in different locations, and honor the deity in their own way. And so again, when we're looking at Roman society, we're seeing that it's quite structured as well, and very interesting to see as well that, you know, high-born women would have one way of worshipping her, then women of normal status or citizen status, and then those lowest in society, those who were seen as sort of outside, both slaves and prostitutes, would venerate the goddess in another way too, with each different sets of petitions And a very interesting thing is that apparently the slaves and prostitutes would petition Venus for forgiveness and purity, that sort of thing there. There is also a suggestion of a rural festival as well on the 19th of August. And this was another sort of harvest festival. And this was very much practiced in rural Italy. So we don't know if this was practiced in Rome itself or if it was a different festival as well. But it seems that it was almost like a harvest festival and it was dedicated to Venus. Though later on it seems that there was more of a crossover, and what happens is that Jupiter is then involved in this festival as well. But we do see suggestions of this being an early fertility festival that Venus is involved with, which again links back to her possibility of being a fertility deity right the way back in the Italic early tradition. So in the rural areas, her older form of her cult may have survived for longer than in the cosmopolitan cities, where new ideas and mixing may have actually watered down or changed the aspect of the deity over time. What we're going to do now is to have a look at some of the depictions of Venus on Hadrian's Wall and some of the items associated with her as well. And so I hope you'll enjoy this next part. So right here we have some of the depictions of Venus from Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall. And these are really interesting in their own way. To start off with, we have this depiction of Venus from the Antonine Wall. Really classical depiction, which is from a memorial stone. So this has probably been done by one of the legions, and right here we can see Venus naked. She's got a cloth around her leg and she's looking down towards this figure on the ground right here, between two pillars which look very nature focused. So you can see the sort of like the flowers or the buds at the top of the pillars. So again, an element of fertility there, but this is a dedication stone. You can just see the V there. We've got a dedication here and it's done in a very classical style. So it's probably done by the legions. So this dedication here to Venus would probably be in her form of victory and her form of luck. So they're thanking her for those at the end of maybe a campaign or when they've constructed a fort or something like that. So a lovely depiction of Venus, and I really like that one. And you can see her curly hair just rolling down the back of her body, again emphasizing that her figure, her form, which is highly sort of sexual and very what we'd see as classically attractive. Following on from that, we've got this Venus here, which is much more worn down and wouldn't have looked like this originally. But this Venus is a very interesting one because this Venus is from Maryport, and it's what I've done is I've zoomed in on a larger piece of the artwork. In the full artwork, what you have is you have Venus here, and then right beside her, where I'm standing, there is a gatehouse done in the 2nd or 3rd century style of Roman forts that we see on Hadrian's Wall. So you almost have her on this block carved in next to a gatehouse. This says the size of the block itself is quite large. And this is an interesting one in its own way, because what we're seeing here is that this may have been carved into a public building within the fort, possibly inside of the commanding officer's house. It could have been on headquarters building or on the granaries, or possibly even on the gatehouse itself, just because of the size of the block of stone. Now with that there, again, the soldiers are venerating Venus. Now traditionally people might think of Venus and go, oh well, the soldiers are wanting sexual conquest, or it's because of the desire for sex and stuff like that. And I think that is, again, because of the way people have interacted with the sexualized images over centuries and stuff like that, isn't really taking in the full aspect of Venus. And instead, you've got to think that this goddess is also known for luck. There was a dice game called Tally. And this dice game Tally, the highest roll on it was called Venus, because it was the most successful, the most lucky. And so when you're having all of those aspects of the goddess, maybe we should think of it in another way entirely. And this instead should be seen as that she is seen as lucky, fortuitous, she's looking after people, and she's also a goddess of victory. So if you're a soldier, you want to have all people on your side, and she's also the partner of Mars. So if she's the partner of Mars, then you've got the aspect of like the war god who's on your side as a soldier already, but having luck and victory on your side too, with the aspect of his partner and possibly his wife in the Roman context, even better. And so I think when we're looking at these figures here, we need not think of the soldiers maybe utilizing the sexual elements. But instead, we should be looking at the soldiers petitioning her for luck and fortune and victory. And that's something I think is quite a lot more overlooked when people consider the goddess herself. Right here now, this is the final image I've chosen to pull up. And this image is now in Scotland at Sir Walter Scott's house in Melrose. And originally it also started off down in Ravensglass in Cumbria. And this would have been a panel of 5 different deities who possibly represented the days of the week. But this one is Venus right here. When we've got Venus, you can see that she's got a cloth around her waist, and she's holding onto it in one hand as she holds onto a pillar right here, and in her other hand she's holding what possibly is a mirror, and then she's got her hair up in a top knot in a certain Roman style. Again, very similar to sort of the other deity here. We've got her top half and her lower body also uncovered, except for the cloth that is hanging around her waist. So we've got this hourglass figure of the female form as, again, a sort of a very attractive image of how people would have seen the deity, as a very sort of attractive and sexual image of the deity, again leading into her roles and her responsibilities and her tribute as the goddess of sexual attraction, desire, all of those things like that. And so when we look at these statues, these would have been around the place, but you've got to think of the multiple aspects. It's not just of her images of those responsibilities, but she's also a key part of the Roman pantheon and has other attributes as well, especially when she's combined with other gods and goddesses. And we're also unsure how the local soldiers would have viewed Venus as well, because they're coming from all over the Roman Empire. And it seems like sometimes when we look at Hadrian's Wall, we've actually got letters from soldiers requesting leave down to Ravensglass, where there was a bathhouse. So because of the fact that it's on the west coast of Britain, it's likely that a lot of the goods that were coming in from the Mediterranean, Spain and the south of France were coming up through there, past Devon and Cornwall, past Wales and the Irish Sea, and then going into the west coast right there. So it could have been that in Ravensglass, that's where you're going to be able to get the luxuries that have come in from Spain or France, maybe wine, nice things like Mediterranean garum, a type of Roman fish sauce that was very popular. And it may have been seen as a really good place to have leave. When you've got the statue of Venus right here, this may be something that the soldiers are walking past and they're thanking her for leave. They're thanking her for the luck of being chosen, and that their commanding officers signed off their leave documents so they can go and enjoy themselves in their bathhouses and have a great time away from the dull, boring aspects of being a soldier. Because even though today we often think of soldiering as very action-packed and it's designed by the way we see films and all of that, in fact, most of the time, soldiering is very boring, day-to-day patrols, normal stuff like that makes a soldier's life very, very boring. And so in turn, being able to go to what would be sort of a leave city, a place where you can go and enjoy yourself, spend some time in the baths, enjoy some luxuries that you don't normally get when you're on the wall, and then you return back at the end feeling a little bit buzzed up, morale a bit higher, and then you're returning back to work. And so this deity or depiction of Venus here is probably being walked past, and the soldiers again are going, "Thank you, Venus, for my leave being administered. Thank you, Venus, for my time off." And they are thanking her alongside the other 4 deities that would have been in the panel as well. Now we're going to look at some of the items that are quite common in Roman Britain, on Hadrian's Wall, and in Roman Gaul, or modern day France as we call it today. Now right here I have these clay pipe figurines of Venus. Now we'll start off with the most complete one right here. This is from Magna Roman fort on Hadrian's Wall. Now this Roman fort was actually an earlier fort, the earlier defences before Hadrian's Wall was constructed, and we have this wonderful clay pipe figurine. Now clay pipe are quite fragile, and when they're quite fragile they do often break, but it's almost impossible to actually find one of these figurines that is complete, and this has led many archaeologists to actually think that they were ritually broken, and this may have been for a number of reasons. Now obviously when we think of Venus, we think of the fact that she's the goddess of sexual attraction, love, desire, all of these sort of things as well, but I've also mentioned her aspects as victory and all of those sort of things too. But these clay pipe figurines appear all over Roman Britain, in Gaul, and they were actually imported in from Gaul as well. So it could have been that they were small little icons or idols that people would say a prayer to the goddess or make a promise to her, and then once the promise was completed, they would break it in some way. And then that would be an example of how they were either completing it or the promise was complete in total. It may have been specifically for women. It may have been something that soldiers may have got for their girlfriends, and then their girlfriends would then have fulfilled a vow, or there was a special sort of ritual that was involved with these little figurines, and then they would break them at the end of the ritual. Or it could have just been that they were used on day-to-day aspects of the Roman life, but they were so fragile that they would get broken and then you'd just replace them. When you're looking at them, you see all of the standard elements that we've talked about before when it comes to Venus. So on this one here, you can see her hair coming down over her shoulders. So in this case, she's holding her hair back behind her ears. You can see her chest, and then the start of her waist coming in and then curved down towards her hips. And then as we can see in the other ones here, we can then presume she would have her hips, then down to her feet. Over here on the far side and the one behind me, you can see she's holding on to a cloth as well, or a towel, which is just visible on that side too. So again, that association with water, with bathing, is a key part of the Venus figurines. Again, as I mentioned before, we don't really know what their purpose was, but they're always found broken. So when we're looking at these, you have to understand, are they ritually broken, are they purposefully broken, or are they just really fragile? But in all cases, we've got a much a standard image of how we see Venus as the goddess of love, attraction, desire, and also luck and victory. So I really hope you've enjoyed today's episode, looking at the goddess Venus and understanding this really interesting but also slightly complex deity as well, who so often we simplify just to her sexual attributes and to her responsibilities as this goddess of love and desire and obviously sexual intercourse. But then on the other side as well, she's got other aspects that the soldiers on Hadrian's Wall and other parts of the Roman Empire may have venerated her for. So I really hope that opens your mind to her, and when you see images of Venus, when you go into museums and stuff like that, don't automatically jump just to the idea of sex, but have a think of her as well about what else could she be representing, why else would someone be venerating this deity, and also consider her relationships as well as the partner of Mars and also the mother of Concordia, or peace. And so there's lots of interesting stuff right there, and also possibly as the mother of the Roman people through Aeneas. So there's loads of aspects of Venus that you have to consider when you're looking at her, and have a think about that as well when you're looking at museums and other aspects of Roman life too, or even other periods of history, because nothing should ever be taken at face value. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, please do like and subscribe, share the video with your friends, write a comment below. If you'd like to actually support me a bit further, I do also have a Patreon, which the link is in the description. And until next time, stay safe and well, and thank you so much for joining me. I hope you'll join me for another video soon.